Hello and welcome to a brand new podcast, Symmetry Sessions, where we unpack the journey and learnings of industry leaders in the change and transformation space. I really hope you enjoy.
My name is Rachel Main, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Jeff Nicholas, Associate Director and Partner at Boston Consulting Group. Jeff has over 25 years' experience in the digital product development space and joined BCG in August 2019 within their technology and digital advantage practice, focusing on their Agile Scale proposition. Hi, Jeff. Absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Rachel. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for asking. So, how I'd like to start is a high-level view of your career to date and what prompted the move into digital product development.
Sure. So, I started off really in a fintech startup as the 10th employee, and so that's kind of where I cut my teeth on product development. In a startup environment, of course, you do a bit of everything. So I was involved in basically all parts of the product, including product support, working with customers to install, configure, run their products, our products, and also in testing, in pre-sales and sales support. All manner of things. And so that was a really great experience over a few years to see how products are built and developed, and also the life cycle, and seeing those many roles within an organization. And I went from there with then some specialist knowledge. I went into Citibank and focusing on smart cards and then other advanced technologies, and was able to really build a lot of interesting solutions myself, and get involved even in, for example, mobile banking before it was a thing, back in feature phones, and then went from there into a .com. So that kind of established a lot of good, strong product development and technology credentials for me. In the .com, I got to see the back end of things in terms of back-end data processing, and a bit of the beginning of the big data era, and also learned Agile when I was there. And so from there, that was in 2006 when I started there, and from there I moved to Singapore, took up a role in Standard Chartered Bank to rebuild their digital banking platform, brought in agile ways of working, DevOps practices, and kicked off the DevOps transformation there in Standard Chartered Bank across the entire technology function. Went from there into Credit Suisse, also in Singapore, where I was able to help rebuild their digital wealth management platform from an omni-channel perspective, so both client-facing and internally facing. Again, bringing in agile practices, bringing in DevOps practices, really scaling that up across the Singapore IT organization, as well as with some global impact. And from there, I went. Credit Suisse asked me to come here to Switzerland, where I'm based now, and help lead the digital transformation in the compliance area. And about 3 years ago, I decided to take everything I've learned and come to BCG to help a greater variety of organizations to bring agile, DevOps, and advanced digital practices and leverage them in their transformations and their journeys. Right. So it's really about, BCG has given me the opportunity to really scale and leverage what I've done over the past across a much broader set of organizations and have a bigger impact.
Thank you so much for that, Jeff. It's really quite the journey you've been on. And I'd like to really focus on Agile. It's been a very popular approach methodology for many years now. And there's a lot of talk online about emerging trends. And one question that always comes up, and I think you're probably the best person to ask, is how do you scale Agile from individual teams to that enterprise level?
Yep. Yeah, and it's a huge question, and I would say that I had some of the answers before I came to BCG, but BCG also kind of had a framework around that, and it makes it really makes a lot of sense to me as an Agile practitioner and a technologist. And so really, if you want to scale it, you can start with grassroots, and that's what I've done in all the organizations I've been in. Is I came in with grassroots Agile, building teams and scaling those teams from the bottom up. But if you want to transform your organization and really scale Agile across, you need to come in from the top, and you need to come to enhance whatever grassroots activities are already there, and start with the purpose and the strategy and the priorities of the organization and make those crystal clear. Because once you're embracing Agile as an organization, you want to make sure that the teams that are doing the work are, and that you're empowering and trusting with more autonomy than ever before, that you want to make sure that they are aligned to exactly what the organization is trying to achieve. And we talk about this unbreakable chain of why, so that at every stage of from the top of the organization on down to the teams, you should be able to answer the question, why are we doing what we're doing, right? And so if you can go to any Agile team and ask them, hey, why are you working on this? And they're able to make that connection to the purpose, the strategy, and the priorities of the organization as a whole, then you've got you've got a fully aligned organization.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, that empowerment piece that you mentioned, and that trust, I think, is always a major part of any transformation. But no, thanks for addressing that. I'm sure a lot of my community will find that really interesting. You mentioned on your intro DevOps.
Yep.
Now, I'm not an expert in DevOps, but I do know that Agile and DevOps can work really well together to enhance overall productivity. Now, why do they complement each other so well?
Yep. So I think that's a really, really great question. And one of the things that we find so you don't need DevOps in order to start working in Agile. Where you need DevOps, or where it becomes really painfully obvious, is when you are building products iteratively. Teams will, in the old world. Let me compare to the old world, the old way of doing things. In theory, you have a waterfall project plan, and in theory, you do all your development, and then you do testing one time, and then you do release, right? And if that ever worked, that would be great. But the reality is that you never actually test only one time. Mm-hmm. And so even in the old world, having automated testing and automated release processes would be really valuable. But it becomes super painfully obvious when you're in an Agile working mode, and every sprint, every 2 weeks, you're intentionally adding a little bit more and a little bit more, and going and having potentially shippable product increments at the end of every sprint. To be potentially shippable, that means that it has to be not only code complete, but test complete, security complete, release viable, right? Potentially shippable. And so that means you've got to do everything that you would normally do in a waterfall project plan, and do maybe after 6 months or 9 months or whatever. You've got to do all of those activities within that one sprint. And then the next sprint, you do it all again. And so that then, you can survive for maybe a couple of sprints without starting to automate things, but then you start to slow down the more and more product that you have to test, to security, to check for security issues, to make sure scales and performs and is stable. The more code you have, the more product features you have, the less and less viable it is to do that manually over time. And so that's where DevOps really becomes a natural step in the progression, where you're then doing your continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment, and doing that across environments that you can automatically scale up and refresh and things like that. And so that's really where DevOps is coming in with Agile together, is to provide the technology enablers that make this kind of rapid iterative software development and kind of always on releasability a reality, right? And
Yeah.
you know, and all of that is talking about the technology side of it. The other side of it is very, very inherent in Agile itself, right? Because Agile is all about bringing cross-functional, let's say, all of the skills that you need to deliver a product together into one team, having cross-functional teams. And DevOps is also about bringing people together, right? It started with the idea that instead of developers and operations folks being at odds with each other, developers wanting to release all the time and operations people wanting to keep things stable, they should work together to meet the goals of the organization, right? And so that's also a natural kind of handshake where we're bringing the operations people and the testers and the developers all together to solve the problem that the organization has set out, which is having rapid, high quality, high security, stable, performant releases on a regular basis. That's the problem that organizations have to solve. And optimizing for one versus the other doesn't solve that problem, right? And that was the old way of doing things pre-DevOps. And DevOps is saying, well, let's optimize for all of those, right? To solve all of those problems together. And how do we do that?
Like that makes total sense. And yeah, thank you. It makes a lot more sense in my mind, certainly. And an area which is very intriguing, especially from my side as a recruiter, is that you are seeing a really big rise of agile consultancies. If I was a client and I wanted to embark upon this transformational agile journey, how would I identify the best partner? I mean, how could I cut through the noise, if you will?
Yeah, there are an awful lot of options out there nowadays, right? I mean, back in 2010, when I was looking to get some partnership in Standard Chartered Bank, there were very few options, and now there are, it seems like everybody and their dog is offering agile consulting services. I think the key is to find a partner with experience, and I equate this to mountaineering. Right? If you were going to go and climb Mount Everest, you wouldn't ever think, you would not even imagine for a second that you were going to do that all by yourself. You're going to go with a skilled and experienced guide, a guide who's been up to the peak of Everest over and over and over again, because that's the only way that you're going to get up and get back alive, literally alive, right? And while, hopefully when we're talking about agile transformation, we're not talking about life and death scenarios, but the same rule applies. You need to have a skilled guide, someone who's done that over and over and over again, who's been there, has seen what works and what doesn't work. And when challenges arise, and they always arise, can give you the confidence that you need to carry on and the experience to adapt to that particular challenge, right? And so that's really the crux of it, is to find those really super experienced people, and they are out there, but you have to really understand what their CVs are, right, on an individual basis, and what kind of value they can bring to your organizations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, in the fact that I imagine if you're a bank, you'd probably approach consultancies who have prior proven record within the banking industry, for example, because of all the regulations and whatnot. So yeah,
and that can be really valuable. And what I would say is that, I mean, there are some times where you need to have that very specific expertise. So yes, somebody who understands, agile in a regulatory environment. And this is a topic that came up last week in a client session I was in. You certainly need to have that kind of experience in some cases, because I've been on the receiving end of advice where, I was in the bank, and uh, consultants would say, well, just, you can just go faster. You don't need to do this. You don't need to do that. But it's like, I'm sorry, I'm in a bank. I'm in a highly regulated environment. There are things that we have to do as a part of that. And, I tend to think of myself a bit as a rule breaker, but I don't break rules that are, let's say, you break the rules that you can break, the rules that are more cultural norms rather than things that are critical, right?
Yeah.
You need maker checker. That's fine, right? You're in a banking environment, you have to have maker checker. You have to have auditability of your code commits back to the person, back to the requirement. All of that makes perfect sense. Let's build that into the system rather than making it manual. That's fantastic. That's a win-win, right? So you have to understand the problem. And for sure, if you have people that don't understand those kinds of problems, then you need to find somebody else. What I would say though is some of those experiences are transferable. Me coming out of a banking environment, I can perfectly well understand the kinds of requirements that would be, or the kinds of needs that would be in an insurance environment or other highly regulated environments, right? Because some of that is very transferable. You might not have, or I might not have the specific domain experience or knowledge of a particular industry, but a lot of the concepts are transferable. Whereas if I'd only had my .com experience, I would not be as well equipped to handle a banking or an insurance environment with Agile, for example.
Yeah. Totally agree with that. Now, the $1 million question, Jeff, which I'm sure a lot of people have probably asked you over the years, is how would you characterize a successful Agile deployment?
Well, yeah, I would say, a successful Agile deployment is one in which teams are working effectively. They're producing output on a regular basis. That's your minimum, right? More important is that teams are producing aligned outcomes. That is, as I mentioned a moment ago about the unbreakable chain of why. So the outcomes that the teams are producing are aligned to the goals of the organization, and they're moving the needle in terms of the OKRs of the organization. And I've used a couple of terms there very, very specifically and consciously. So as I said, the first thing that you want to do is get teams sprinting and creating output on a regular repeated basis. But output is not the same as outcomes. And what we really are trying to achieve with Agile is that we're moving the needle for the business. And that means that we have to be producing outcomes. So and getting the organization to be outcome oriented rather than output oriented. And I've been in a lot of organizations where I've seen the outcome orientation. So if you think traditional project plans, did we hit our milestones? Yes, we hit all of our milestones. We delivered the thing that we were supposed to deliver. And that's all sometimes people care about, unfortunately. The real question is not did you deliver the thing, but did you actually move the needle for the organization, right? And too often organizations focus in on the thing that's easy to measure, that I delivered the features that we thought we needed at the beginning. But what's really important in Agile, and the big kind of mental shift that the organization has to make, is to not really care so much about the features that are being delivered or the products that are being delivered, but what are the outcomes that are being delivered, right? Do I want to increase, is my goal to increase the speed of underwriting? Is my goal to increase the click-through rate on a particular product? Is my goal to increase the revenue of a particular product or the number of accounts being opened? Those are measurable, tangible outcomes that we're trying to reach. And in order to reach those outcomes, we then implement software features or other product features, right? And that's what we have to focus on. It's harder to measure. It's more long term sometimes. That is, you can't necessarily know within a couple of weeks or within a month whether or not you've actually delivered on that. You have to measure that a little bit more on a longitudinal basis in some cases. But I would also suggest that if you pick really good outcomes and you're delivering iteratively and rapidly in increments, that you should start to see those the needle moving in a relatively short period of time. When I was in the .com, we would be monitoring our dashboards with every release, and we would be looking, within hours, we would see whether the needle was moving in the direction we wanted or not. Not all industries are like that. Not all businesses are like that. I fully understand. Again, with my breadth of experience, I have that advantage. But I know that it's possible to get to measure those outcomes and to be outcome oriented, and that's, I think, the truest measure of success.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, being focused on the outcomes rather than being so focused on the outputs. Really interesting stuff. Thanks, Jeff. And what's been professionally the biggest challenge on your side when delivering this agile transformation?
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge is really around leadership, and we in our work with clients, we actually focus a lot on this. And even before I came to BCG, getting teams sprinting is relatively easy. I won't say it's easy; it's relatively easy, and it's critical, absolutely, getting the right processes in place and getting those teams working in an agile way and getting product owners in place. All of that's important. But once you've gotten that there, really to transform the organization, you have to have leadership fully aligned and embracing agile ideas and agile ways of working, agile thinking. And so we spend a lot of time working with leaders to change their behaviors, to adopt agile leadership behaviors. And we have a whole model around agile leadership behaviors. It was 6 traits and a whole bunch of behaviors underneath that. And I was just in a working with a client last week exactly on this, where leaders will literally write out an agile leadership plan and they'll commit to certain behavioral changes. And we use behavioral economic kind of nudges and other techniques to help them make their leadership, their behavior change goals public and social, and to have accountability to somebody, and to then have consequences that they've agreed to if they don't actually follow through on those behaviors, because those are all the key triggers to actually changing a habit, right? And what we're asking people to do is the hardest thing in the world, which is to change their own habits and their own way of doing things, right? So that's really the biggest challenge that we face. It's also the most rewarding thing when you get leaders to commit to making those personal changes, to understand that they need to do that, and then to commit to making those personal behavioral changes and working with them on those changes and coaching them through that. That's really, really amazingly rewarding.
Yeah, definitely. I think that kind of behavioral, you're changing your habits, especially if you've been within a company for many years. A lot of the transformation leaders always say that's their biggest challenge. So, and thanks for that, Jeff. Now, moving to the future of Agile. Obviously, it's here to stay. What do you think is the future?
I think that, Agile has evolved a lot over the past 21 years, right? It was started in 2001 with the Agile Manifesto and the Agile Principles, and I would say that the manifesto and the principles have stood the test of time, with one exception. The authors of the Agile Manifesto were focused on software development. And what we've seen is that if you change the word software to, product development or producing outcomes, then it's fully applicable, right? So that's really the only change that you have to make from the original manifesto and principles, is to take away the focus on only software to then apply it more broadly. And once you do that, I think that they're really kind of rock solid set of foundational ideas that have been able to and have been used by organizations for all kinds of transformations and for all kinds of applications. I mean, we use Agile in sales. We work with clients to use Agile in customer service, and so just even outside of product development. So it's broadly applicable. So that's really important for longevity, and I think it will continue to evolve. And we talk, in the beginning, Agile was all about working in teams, right? We want to work in teams, and that's great. But then what you realize is that you have to go, if you want those teams to be successful, then you have to get the whole organization behind them, right? And that's really why we then start talking about scaling Agile to the whole organization, because, and I've experienced this myself in StanChart and in CS, Credit Suisse, where you can only go so fast and do so much until you run up against those organizational boundaries where the rest of the organization is not agile. And so, then you have to start transforming, procurement and your release processes and your compliance processes and your audit and everything else around that, and your governance and all of these things, right? And you even get down to the point where you have to transform your HR practices to support cross-functional agile teams. So it becomes really big when you want to, and that's why we talk about Agile Scale or enterprise Agile, because you have to then touch all of these other parts of the organization in order to allow those teams to do everything that you want them to do, right? And so I think the future, back to your question, I think the future of Agile is really bright, and organizations will continue to adopt Agile, and also to adapt Agile to new and different challenges, right? And when I say adapting Agile, you're adapting using the principles as a foundation to then build Agile practices in various contexts.
Yeah, definitely. I think even from my perspective, I can apply Agile to my day-to-day work, like working in sprints, for example.
Yep.
And I think a lot of my clients, when it comes to customer experience, Agile's always at the forefront. So yeah, it's definitely here to stay, as I said. So thank you so much for that, Jeff. Now we move on to the final part of the session, which is Q&A from my Agile community. So I've got two questions. First of all, I see a lot of organizations treating Agile as a prescription for success. In other words, follow these rules, methods, and templates, and all will be well. Have you had to overcome this mindset, and how did you do it? What are the biggest hurdles that you have encountered?
Yeah, so this is a mindset or an idea that I would say that we see quite often, and we've seen it often enough working with clients that we now preemptively address it. And we always, when we start working with clients, we say that Agile is something that has to be tailored to your organization. You can't take, and clients will often ask, well, can you show us an example of an Agile structure, or Agile this, Agile that, governance, whatever. And yes, we have frameworks that we bring to bear, but we always have to customize those to the organization, right? And I would say that if you want to do something that's just plain cookie cutter, you can say, okay, go use Scrum, right, in your teams. That's relatively, that you should be using Scrum in the same way, at least at the beginning. But even there, as teams gain experience with Scrum and with Agile working, then teams will inevitably customize and modify it, this team's retro is not done the same as that team's retro, and the same at the organizational level. Although we have ideas around quarterly business review and things like that, how we do governance in this organization is going to be different from that organization. So, as I say, we address this right up front, right? We can have templates, we can have patterns, but every organization is unique, and Agile has to be custom fit to that organization's mindset, that organizational culture, especially the culture, until Agile can be implemented and over time, hopefully used to help move the culture, right? The Agile ways of working have to actually adapt to the culture until they can change the culture, if you will, right? So definitely, it's a beast in every organization. It's a bespoke effort.
So really tailoring your approach based client to client. And what are the biggest hurdles that you've encountered?
In terms of adapting Agile, or
overcoming the mindset of using it as a prescriptive, people thinking that Agile is a prescriptive method for success.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's exactly, not. So the biggest hurdle is people just wanting it to be fast and simple, right? Just give us the template. In fact, we don't need anything else. Just give us the template and we're done, right?
Yeah.
And give us the prescription. It's like, maybe it's kind of like the modern idea of wanting to have a pill to cure all your ails, right? And Agile is not a pill to cure all your ails. And if there are underlying organizational, cultural issues, Agile won't solve those, right?
Yeah.
Those get solved through, through a number of things, right? It's often we see, going into organizations, that there's a dissonance between what the organization says it wants people to do and what it actually allows people to do, right? So we want you to go fast, but we're putting a whole bunch of roadblocks in your way to going fast, right? That's a classic one. And so we have to address those dissonances up front, and we also have to get the leaders to understand that their actions and their behavior can have a big influence on the culture of the organization, which then has an influence on the applicability of Agile in that organization. So it's a big, depending on the organization, it can be a major transformation. And I would say when Agile doesn't work in an organization, it's when and I hate to put all the burden on leaders, but it's when leaders are not willing to, embrace that transformation for themselves.
Yeah, definitely. I think people think, we've embedded Agile, we'll just use this framework and we'll start seeing results straight away. But obviously, as you say, it is a continuous, it is an iterative process. So, okay. So second question. To some businesses, the Agile delivery teams are seen as a factory to deliver a grand design and are rarely invited when the design is being created. How can we help bridge the gap between business stakeholders and the delivery teams?
Yeah, fantastic question, really. I don't think there's a silver bullet to this. I think when everything is new, let's say you're in the kind of the product creation primordial soup, you have to you always it almost always starts with some idea on the business side, right? And hopefully those business folks are then starting to talk with IT leadership, but often the team that's going to deliver that grand new business vision or new product suite hasn't even been onboarded yet. It doesn't exist within the organization. And so there is a bit of a chicken and egg thing that happens between, getting the idea, formulating that idea, and creating and getting the funding around that, and then creating the team that's going to deliver that. what should happen. And so even if that part cannot include the team in the teams that are delivering in the design, once you've established that idea, once you've onboarded those people and you've organized those teams to deliver that product. And when I say onboarding, I mean, you could even be pulling people from within the organization to create this new digital factory or digital delivery capability, but they weren't involved up front, or maybe they were only involved, in a spot way. But once you've got them there, then they should always be fully engaged in the delivery and in the design of those deliverables. And if the organization has embraced outcome-oriented delivery rather than output-oriented delivery, then they will help to shape the best way to achieve those outcomes, right? Mm-hmm. And that's really what we want to do with in Agile, as we talk about alignment and autonomy, and we want to have the teams fully aligned to what we're trying to accomplish, but we want to empower those teams with the autonomy to decide how best to deliver on those goals, right? Mm-hmm. And that's certainly where we try to get organizations to. As I say, sometimes in the very initial stages, the teams aren't formed up to really be involved, but they should be involved, become very involved very quickly as soon as they've been established.
Perfect. Well, no, thanks so much for that, Jeff. It's been really useful. I think the key take homes are really about empowerment, trusting a team, the correct behaviors from leadership, and becoming outcome focused. And they're the real themes that I think have really ran through this whole episode. So thank you so much. I know that my community will really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for the time invested. And it's going to be of great interest and value, I'm sure. So thank you so much, Jeff, for your time.
You're very welcome, Rachel. I really appreciate them. Just great questions, and I really appreciate the conversation here. It's been fantastic.
Thank you so much. Okay, then. Thank you very much, Jeff.